Welcome to ANEC Sports' off-season coverage of girls basketball. My name is Sam Frick. I'm the founder and editor at Around the Northeast Corner, covering schools across Northeast Indiana and Elkhart County. That includes the ACAC, the NECC, and the Northeast State. We're going to kick off our new series by taking a look at the teams that were eliminated on the first night of sectionals in the girls basketball state tournament, except for maybe just a couple teams that we'll just reserve them for last. But we'll go ahead and start with the Woodland Warriors. Now, when you take a look at the Woodland Warriors over the past several years, they have been a very successful program at Woodburn in terms of girls basketball success dating back to the 2018-19 season. Woodland has experienced just one losing season in that process. They went 15-8 in 18-19, 18-7 in 19-20, 9-13 in 2020-21, 19-5 in 21-22, 20-5 in 22-23, 23-24 was the 18-9 season. That was Dave Randall's first year after Gary Cobb retired. And then this past season that we just completed, Woodland went 14-8. Pretty good record considering I think a lot of people were concerned that maybe this team might have a down season. Well, for that down season, they still won 14 games with that roster, considering they had to replace a 1,000-point scorer in Taylor Tunabular, had to replace a pretty good senior class at Woodland. I think the Warriors did a pretty good job this year, all things considered, and still finished second in the ACAC. Now, when you look at this past season, they opened the season with Belmont, Garrett, New Haven, Angola, and Leo, which they had played 4 of the first 5 on the road. The only home game was on the 16th against Garrett. The Belmont game was a difficult game. I think we knew that was going to be a tough game for Woodland to open the season with, and even though Belmont won that game by 22 points, I think that was more of an indicative of just how good Belmont was this past season and less of Woodland's deficiencies. The second game against Garrett, that game actually really should not have been that close. They dominated for about 3 quarters in that game. They led by as many as 25 points in that contest, and yet Garrett made a proud comeback, so to speak. They really put a good fourth quarter effort from Garrett in that fourth quarter, and the game was a lot closer because of the emergence of Emma Kaufman in that fourth quarter. Garrett just played a very inspiring fourth quarter, and Woodland still won by 8 points. So obviously Woodland defensively did its job for the most part against Garrett, even though the offense did have a little bit of their cold spells in that game. They took care of business against New Haven and Angola. I would say, considering how decent Angola was this year, they still did a pretty good job on Angola. And Alyssa Anderson had a monster game against Angola. She had over 30 points in that contest. The loss to Leo was a surprise, a 55-43 loss. I think the score was more of a surprise than the outcome itself. We thought this would be a 50-50 ball game on paper. Leo just played better that night than Woodland did. Arguably the biggest surprise of the season for Woodland was the win over Jade County on the 29th at Jade County, 52-46. The last time the Woodland Warriors defeated Jade County in a girls basketball season, that came the year that Woodland won the ACAC tournament in 2019-20. So that was a surprise by many people, and I think that gave us a good indication of what was going to happen in the ACAC. We eventually found out that Jade County is human after all in girls basketball, and they had a down season. Woodland finished second in the ACAC. Spoiler alert. As the season rolls along, they would have a loss to Eastside by 17. They beat Adams Central by 18, although that was a much closer game than that. Played a pretty good game against Bluffton in the regular season at Bluffton, lost by 23 points, but I think that score is far from what the play actually showed. Put up a pretty decent effort against Norwell, lost by 11 points, although that was mostly because Alyssa Anderson just went bananas that game. They had a win against Southern Wells, 61-53 at Southern Wells. That's a much better Southern Wells team than what we've normally seen from the Raiders. Excuse me. And then they dominate Heritage, which they had a rebuilding season. They beat Wayne Trace by 8. That's a team they normally struggle with in the regular season. Wayne Trace does have a solid basketball program in the state of Ohio, but Woodland did take care of business against their cross-state rivals. They beat Concordia by 10 points, 56-46, against the Cadets, a team they beat last year, which I'm talking about 23-24, to which Woodland won that sectional for the first time since 1990. They lost to Lakewood Park by 10, perhaps a surprising outcome by some people, although Lakewood Park still had Ava McGray that season, so obviously the Panthers had a nice season of their own. They did defeat the Blackhawk Christian Braves by 24 points, but Blackhawk had a young team this season, so by many people's concerns, that was seen as a down season for them. They drew Bluffton in the ACAC tournament, lost by 15 to Bluffton, which, again, more of how competitive Woodland was down the stretch against Bluffton than the outcome of the score would tell you. They beat Bishop Lures by 20 points, which Lures lost a lot from the previous team that won a state championship. They beat South Adams convincingly, held on to beat Central Noble by 4, even though Woodland showed some moments of pulling away in that game against Central Noble. They beat Prairie Heights by 21, a rebuilding Prairie Heights team, and then they drew Whitcote in the first round of sectionals, hosted by Bluffton. And this is a game that I think some people thought maybe Woodland would have a chance of advancing, maybe even getting to the sectional championship game. But to Whitcote's credit, the Whitcote Wildcats just could not miss the entire sectional tournament whatsoever. And Woodland just kind of caught Whitcote on the wrong day, so to speak. Woodland did not shoot the ball as well as they normally would, which that tells you a lot about Woodland stats. And Whitcote they just couldn't miss it all. They were lights out in that sectional. So ultimately, what you have here is a 14-8 campaign for the Woodland Warriors. You look at the roster in terms of the players they have in Woodland. Obviously, a breakout season for Alyssa Anderson. She was showing some promise last season as a sophomore, but this season I thought Alyssa Anderson really stood on her own as one of the top players in Northeast Indiana, especially one of the top centers in all of Northern Indiana, particularly in her class. She was just simply sensational this past season, not only in girls basketball, but also in volleyball. Volleyball will be a whole other story for another time. But Anderson averaged 17 points per game, shot 55% from the floor. She was a 56% free throw shooter, which she's a power forward. That is to be expected. She also averaged 10.6 rebounds, 1.6 assists, 1.9 steals, and 1.5 blocks. And Anderson, a couple of games this year where she really stood on her own. The 30-point performance against Angola. You had the 30-point performance in the loss to Norwell. 23 points against Wayne Trace. For some reason, she plays really well against Wayne Trace. She had that 22-point performance against Jay County. 18 against Adams Central. 25 in the loss to Whitco. 27 in the win over Lures. 26 in the win over Concordia. And even if you go as far down as the rebounds, she had 18 rebounds against Lures. 18 against Angola. 24 against Jay County. 20 against the Jets. Obviously, just a great season for her. And then senior Brooke Knibular had a nice senior year, averaging 10.9 points, 32% shooting, 30% from 3, 67% from the foul line, 4.6 rebounds, 2.6 steals, and 4.6 assists per game for the senior point guard Knibular. Brooke Knibular nonetheless had a nice career in Woodland on the soccer field as well as the basketball court. Played well for the Woodland Warriors and maintained the Knibular family history at Woodland. Other players that stood out this season, I thought Raiden Wiedenhofer showed some good moments this year for the Woodland Warriors as a kind of that wing player for the Woodland Warriors, averaging 5 points, shot 26% from 3, about 1.5 rebounds, 1.6 assists, 1.3 steals per game. I thought she showed some nice moments for her. McKenna Smith, had a nice senior year. The offense wasn't always there for McKenna Smith, but she did shoot 57% from 3, 85% from the foul line, 2.4 rebounds, 1.3 assists. Nice year for McKenna Smith, even though the role she played on the basketball team was quite smaller than her play on the volleyball courts. Still had a nice year nonetheless. I thought Emma McDaniel showed some decent moments and showed some potential going into next year as a senior. This past year as a junior, she shot 31% from three, and she had nearly a steal per game. I mean, the numbers were not overly, they weren't overwhelming by any means, but I thought McDaniel at times did show some potential for what she can do as a senior next year. Alex Jackway, nice year defensively for Woodland, where she grabbed 2.7 rebounds, nearly a steal per game for Alex Jackway. And then McKenna Gobble, I thought emerged quite well as a sophomore at power forward, averaging 5 points per game, shot 31% from the floor, 29% from three, 3.1 rebounds, 1.6 assists, 1.1 steals, and she averaged, well, she had 2 blocks. I shouldn't say she averaged a block per game. She had 0.1 blocks per game. She had 2 blocks on the season. Nevertheless, that's the roster we have right now. So going into next season, again, this is once again another narrative of Woodland that Woodland is going to lose some pieces, right? Although I don't think they're going to lose quite as much this year as they did last year. I think last year they had a bigger senior class. This year, not as deep of a senior class, but obviously the loss of Brooke Knibler is going to raise questions on who's going to fill that point guard position. And I will say, when we look at the point guard position, I think right now, if we're looking at just the roster that's currently constructed, not looking at JV, not looking at middle school feeder systems, just looking at the varsity roster that Woodland has right now, you have about 3 guards, I think, that can fill that spot. Layla Hodson, Caitlin Sterling, and Scarlett Gillingham. All 3 of these players did not play a ton of minutes this year, but did play some varsity basketball. Hodson probably played the most of the 3, and she averaged 1.6 points. And she grabbed about a little over a rebound per game. Did pretty well, all things considered there. I think Layla Hodson going into her junior year might be seen as the favorite to potentially start as a point guard for Woodland. I think she's a pretty decent player. I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case. Caitlin Sterling obviously did not play much at all at the varsity level, more of a JV player this past season. Showed some good things for just 8 games, made both of her threes. Scored 11 points in 8 games. Got nearly a rebound per game. I mean, all things considered, small sample size. Showed you enough. Maybe Sterling has more to give next year. Scarlett Gillingham, again, much like with Sterling, did not play much, only 9 games at varsity. 1.3 points, shot 50% from the floor, 50% from 3, 2 of 4 from downtown, 67% from the foul line, grabbed 7 rebounds, so that's nearly a rebound per game. She had 4 assists, so that's nearly a half assist per game. Showed something. Again, these are players that have room to grow, but showed at least enough that maybe by next year, maybe these players are going to improve from what they've shown in their freshman year, or in the case for Hodson, her sophomore year, and maybe you have something there. Savannah Schumann is another one that could be an intriguing player for next year because she kind of plays that combo guard position. Where does Schumann fit in that lineup? I think it's an interesting question. She averaged 4.1 points per game as a freshman, shot 33% from 3, 29% from downtown, 44% from the foul line, 2.4 rebounds, 1 assist per game, 1.7 steals. I would say Schumann is probably the most likely player to start. I just don't know if it's necessarily the point guard position. That might be the only thing. I'm not 100% sure. But with Schumann being just listed as a guard, maybe you could slot her in the 1, maybe slot her in the 2. Maybe she becomes a player that can play both positions interchangeably. Maybe you have something there. I think McDaniel should start at the 2 guard position if Schumann is a point guard. But I mean, McDaniel possibly could slot in to that Reagan Wiedenhofer role next year. It's very possible. for Emma McDaniel. I do think she will have a little bit more of a role next year as a senior. So I think we do expect her to play a bigger role for this team next year. I think the real question becomes with Woodland, obviously the point guard position is going to be key when you have a player as talented as Alyssa Anderson. You need that point guard that can feed their star player inside. And so whoever can fill that role of the point guard position is going to have a tall task ahead of them, as this is the hardest position in basketball, is the point guard position, not only because of the offense, scoring wise, but also the ability to generate plays, run the offense, get players involved, play good defense, establish an identity of the offense for Woodland. And if you don't have those things, your offense starts to struggle for Woodland in that aspect. So I think for pros and cons, just kind of wrap things up. One pro I see here with Woodland, obviously they're going to have a lot of returning players back overall, which is very important when you're looking at an identity, especially for Coach Randall's vision for Woodland. You definitely need returning players for a school as small as Woodland. So that's a good thing. Obviously, having Alyssa Anderson is going to help solve a lot of the question marks that Woodland may have on paper. She is a really good basketball player, and more than likely, if she's healthy next year, probably will get 1,000 points. Probably can get to at least 700 rebounds, maybe gets to 800. I don't know if she'll quite get to 1,000 rebounds, but she'll at least compete for that. But I think at the very least, Anderson should be having once again another double-double season if she's healthy next year. And obviously, I think the size of Woodland will still be pretty good. They should be able to rebound the ball at a decent rate. They averaged 29.9 rebounds per game this past season. I don't think that number is going to fall too far off from last year, or this past year, I should say. So I think they'll be okay in that aspect. The defense should be fine. But I do think, in terms of cons, the point guard position is going to be a question mark for me, because I think this is the first time we're really going to have a point guard by committee approach for the Woodland Warriors. Whereas this season, you just had Brooke Kniber kind of slot right in as the true de facto point guard for the Woodland Warriors. Scoring depth will always come up as a question mark, just because Woodland this past season did not have the best scoring depth out there. So the real question mark then becomes, what is McKenna Gobble's ceiling for Woodland? I don't think she's a star player like at that level of Alyssa Anderson, but maybe Gobble. But Gobble has showed enough that I think she can give you a little bit more than 5 points per game and 3 rebounds. Maybe those numbers double up a little bit next year. I think they may be a little bit more. They may emphasize a little bit more on feeding the ball inside, just because they know they have something going with Anderson and Gobble. I think those are going to be 2 players to watch next year. I'm curious to see where Savannah Schumann fits into that starting 5. How much can she bring from an offensive standpoint? Because I think her defense is pretty good. I think she shows you enough in terms of her role playing abilities that I think she will fit in fine. But can she bring more to this team in other aspects that we have not seen yet from a soon-to-be sophomore in Savannah Schumann? Depth is obviously going to be a question mark on paper in terms of scoring. The depth in terms of bodies is pretty good overall. I would say, to kind of wrap things up, I think Woodland is definitely in a pretty good spot for the future. They should be able to compete in the ACAC. Whether or not they can compete for a sectional title, that's a whole nother discussion. And that is a hill I will not climb until we even get to that season. So, I would say pretty good future ahead for Woodland. I think Anderson's has shown that she belongs in this area in terms of basketball. And I think Woodland expects to be one of the top teams in the ACAC early on in this offseason.